Basically, cybersecurity, as you most likely also realize right now, became very, let's say, crucial topic for every single organization or the government in the world. And basically, it's, you know, as we are kind of going and becoming more and more digital, and more aspects of our daily lives, business operations, public services are online. So basically, we also face some threats that might impact our daily and also some very critical workloads and processes. So therefore, we are bringing this event with some of the very strong names in the market to have a bit better understanding how we can be more secure, resilient, and safer. So very brief intro from my side. My name is Simonas Černiauskas. I'm based in Vilnius. Currently, I'm talking and meeting you from Tallinn. And I'm representing Microsoft in Baltics, and particularly Lithuania and Estonia. And basically, we have, I would say, very interesting speakers. I'm looking forward to hear and to see their presentations. And we will start today with Karolina Doran from IBM. Then we will follow up with Juvare and Giedrius Meškauskas. After that, we will have the new star NordLayer and Carlos Salas. And the last but not least presentation will come from our one of the leading legal houses, Ellex, and Dr. Ąžuolas Čekanavičius will present his view on some legal aspects and peculiarities. Don't leave us after presentations. We will have some time for Q&A. I have some questions on top of my head, mind, but of course you are more than welcome to ask the presenters and panelists by yourself. You can do it. You will be able to do it, you know, just raising a hand and basically opening the camera and saying it. Or you can also use the chat. You simply need to click on chat and then to text your question, and we will take it during the appropriate time. That's it from the intro side. And dear Karolina, welcome to start your presentation.
Hello, it's a big pleasure to be here. Welcome, everybody. My name is Karolina Doran. In IBM, I'm responsible for security, solutions, and services sales in Poland and Baltics. I was asked to give you a few security trends that IBM is seeing on the market. So I will share with you my thoughts and my observations, also with some data that we gathered across the market. I hope it will be worthwhile for you. I'm sorry that I didn't manage to share my presentation because we don't use Microsoft Teams, but we have Anne who will hopefully change the slides for me. So excuse for me asking every time to change the slide. So change the slide, please. Okay. So we all know that the world is struggling with the pandemic, shifts from work from home and back to the office. Then we have the war in Ukraine and all the other geopolitical changes. It all creates a huge chaos. And as we know, chaos is the best environment for the cyber attackers. No wonder that last year we have seen a big growth of cyber attacks on the markets across the whole globe. But first, let me share with you some statistics from the previous year. In 2021, ransomware decreased from 23 to 21%. However, it was still the top attack on the market. Going to attack vectors, phishing was the most common way to gain access to organizations. 41% of all the attacks were done with usage of this method. Now, if we want to look at the industries, it is very interesting because first time in many years, manufacturing was the most attacked industry across the whole globe. And something very much related to that. Someone is not on mute, please. We saw significant growth in the IT attacks, OT attacks on the network. Another interesting observation is a huge growth in the Linux threats, in the Linux attacks. This is, I think, related to the cloud environments being adopted. And this Linux operations frequently is in the cloud environments. Okay, so please let's move to the next slide. So these were just a few numbers that I gave you, which were taken from the new X-Force Threat Intelligence Index, just issued by IBM X-Force team. This report, this is an annual report that includes some top attack types, top threat actors, trends in malware development. It shows some geographic and industry trends, but most important, it shows some risk mitigation recommendations. The analysis in this report are performed based on experience of our 8 security operations centers across the globe, in which we analyze data of over 15,000 customers. So I believe it gives us a good idea on what is the current trends in the security. And please move to the next slide. Apart from the attackers and outside threats, I think it is also to consider the current issues that the CSOs have in the organizations. And here, let me share with you a picture from IDC report that pointed key 7 issues that CSOs have in the current organizations. The first one is the digital transformation and moving to cloud, which gives a lot of new challenges in the security. Then we have a shortage of skilled personnel in security area. I think everyone is dealing with that. Then a lot of different security tools to be used, that sometimes they do the same things at the same time. On the other hand, we have growing compliance regulations that don't make the life easier. And also, to end it with, very much more sophisticated methods that the cyber criminals use nowadays. We can imagine how the CSOs struggle nowadays. So if we move to the next slide, we have grouped the security challenges into 4 major areas. And the first area is to protect the data across hybrid clouds. As organizations continue to move to hybrid cloud, the diversity of IT deployments across IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS is driving complexity and a loss of visibility of data, how it's stored, accessed, and processed. Here we need to really secure the critical data. And this is a very comprehensive exercise, as we have to discover the data, classify it, then monitor the activity on the database, and finally automate the compliance. Then the second area is secure remote workers and consumers. Resources are being accessed by growing number of actors nowadays. We have employees, suppliers, partners, customers, all using multiple devices from distributed and remote locations. We need to control access to our applications and data. And again, this is very difficult exercise, as we have to secure it from all angles, user, device, and connection. Then the next point is how to prepare for the attack. Of course, we put in place many tools to protect ourselves, like firewalls, antivirus, and some other. But we have to be prepared that we will never have 100% security, and this attack can still occur. This is why we have to have the right tools and processes to have quick visibility and be able to fight with the attack fast. And last but not least, as cybersecurity is a board-level discussion, the security CSOs are challenged very often to optimize their security programs. First of all, they have to show that the money spent on security brings the expected outcomes. Here is worth to consider what kind of tools we have and use, how to optimize them. We have to see how we can automate some security operations to free up the time for the experts to do more interesting tasks than just boring, repeatable L1 tasks. And also, we have to consider if it's maybe worth to outsource some of the IT security operations. Here, all this has to be considered. And next slide, please. So having gone through the main areas that the CSOs should address, I would like to come back for a minute to the X-Force team report that I mentioned before. Apart from all the trends, interesting data, and some explanation of different kinds of attacks, it includes some principles and some recommendations for the organizations. And let me just share a couple of them with you. First of all, regarding the principles. Zero trust as the basic principle for all behaviors. We all know that zero trust is a very old term. It has like 15 years or something like that. But currently, it has a new way of understanding. It approaches the security problems, assuming that the breach has already occurred, and we have to try to make the life of the cyber attackers more difficult, not to get to our network. The second principle is security automation. This enhances our incident response. With the amount of attacks that we have currently, it is very important to automate some tasks that are simple and repeatable to put the effort on the more advanced things. The third one is extend and response technology. This is key to have visibility in what we have on the organization, who is attacking us, and in which area of the environment. Now going to risk mitigation recommendations. First of all, it is key to develop a response plan for ransomware. And this is regardless of the geography or the industry. This will help us to be prepared for the attack and act fast when the attack occurs. The second point is to implement multi-factor authentication on every remote access point into a network. And here again, the IBM X-Force team saw that more and more companies started to implement it, and this is very good direction because it makes the life of cyber attackers much more difficult. Then the next point is to adopt layered approach to combat phishing. Unfortunately, there is no one single tool or solution that will prevent us from all phishing attacks, but having several layers of solutions will help us to respond and to protect ourselves. And last but not least, we should refine and mature our vulnerability management system. This is also key to keep the company secure. And this is more or less what I prepared. I really encourage you to read the full report of our X-Force team. If anyone would like to have it after the event, we can send it. And please, of course, reach out to me if you would like us to speak about the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for really interesting and insightful presentation. Maybe any of you have one question for Carolina, because we will have additional panel discussion. But if any of you have something to ask right now after listening and viewing, go ahead. And if not, so thanks once again, Carolina. And then we are moving to the second speaker. Here we will have Giedrius Meškauskas from Juvare. And most likely Juvare is not a very well-known brand or company here in Baltics or Lithuania. But the Giedrius and team is we are really doing some amazing stuff in terms of business continuity for some very critical elements of our infrastructures, including some emergency services and in the US. But Giedrius, floor is yours, and you will be able, of course, to share with us much more interesting stuff.
Hello, everybody. Just a second. I'll try to share my screen. I hope you can see my presentation, Simonas.
Yep, I do, and hope, and I believe that all of us now see the front page.
Okay. So, hello, everybody. I'll talk a little bit about the technologies to increase resilience. Thank you, Carolina, for a great introduction into the cybersecurity side. That's definitely one of the main points at the current moment when we talk about the organizational resilience, especially what we see worldwide at the current moment. I'm Giedrius Meškauskas. I worked for 11 years in ambulance service, everything from paramedic to dispatch center manager. And from the emergency management or resilience standpoint, I had an opportunity and honor to participate in two major events in Lithuania. So that was the Eurobasket Championship in Lithuania and Pope's visit in 2018 to plan, prepare, and respond to various events during those events. In my current company, Juvare, I've been together for 7 years, worked as business analyst, product owner, and now I work as a business development person for Baltic and European countries. Our company, Juvare, works with various organizations, and from very small companies to big enterprises, from municipalities to federal agencies, international organizations. And Juvare translated from Latin means help. And our goal is to help our partners and clients to make a meaningful impact to communities that they work for and to the people who they respond to in case of emergencies. We work all across the world. Multiple clients in the United States, APAC region, Europe. We work with nonprofit organizations, with healthcare networks, with private organizations, everything from public safety to banking and finances, to with all the organizations that care about their safety, their organization safety, and their staff safety, and about managing events and incidents. Last week, I participated in a conference where I saw this quote, and it really makes sense, and it's really very meaningful. At the current moment, we are entering a risk environment that is outpacing our ability to respond. And if we think, probably in the last 20, 30 years, we have never had 3 major incidents or major incidents declared in Lithuania. We had COVID for a few years. That's currently kind of slowed down. We had immigrant crisis, and now we have a war in Ukraine. And there are multiple threats and multiple situations related to that organizations need to think about, need to take care about. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And the resilience, what is that? So resilience can be separated into very many different categories and groups. We can talk about employee or personal resilience, about social resilience, psychological resilience, physical resilience. We can talk about community as a whole resilience when we talk about means of transportation, food, water availability, electricity, internet, and many other things. Cyber resilience, I think that will be definitely a topic mostly covered today. So we already heard about cyber resilience, and probably we'll hear more. But I want to talk about a bigger picture that really kind of embeds everything: employee, community, cyber resilience, organizational, and that is our organizational resilience. It's an ability to make organizations successful even during the complicated times. So the organizations need to anticipate, prepare, and respond and adapt to those changes and disruptions in the environment. We saw amazing examples during the COVID. How organizations changed, they adapted, they responded to potential threats, and they really kind of made it through those difficult times. So the idea that's really should be kind of thought, this is kind of a little bit pessimistic, but it's safe. We need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, not other way around. If we if we prepare for the best and kind of get to a worse situation, we will not be ready. So what does that kind of ready means? And in the emergency management or public safety world, it's kind of common to have the whole resilience or emergency management separated into 5 phases. The first one is prevention. It's really kind of things that you can prevent ahead of time. Then those things that you cannot prevent, you can mitigate at some scale. If you do your homework and prepare for emergency situations, critical infrastructure failures, or other kind of incidents, you can be more likely to respond efficiently. And definitely recovery that comes after the response and after the problems are solved or almost solved. And really, what is very easy to adapt for organizations is really those 5 phases. It's not emergency management, it's just organizational resilience. Now I'll jump a little bit into each of those phases a little bit more, just to describe you kind of what can be done and what should be done maybe ahead of time. So 5 phases. The first one is prevention, and it really focuses on everything bad or dangerous to be prevented. What can you do ahead of time to prevent those things? We talked already, Carolina already talked about IT infrastructure, about preparing, about having security measures installed to be ready ahead of time. Software. Sounds like very simple things, but how many incidents we saw due to the software world and hardware, even vulnerabilities, because somebody did not update the software, somebody used bad software or inefficient software, and really that's organization's homework to prepare ahead of time. Antivirus protection, simple, kind of self-explanatory. That can be done ahead of time, but when the issue or the virus kind of penetrates all the security layers, it's too late to do something about that. And definitely staff. Staff's very important part of the whole organization, and educating the staff, training the staff to be more resilient, more secure, to think about the threats is very important part of the whole organizational resilience. Business continuity plans, emergency management plans is definitely a thing that organizations should start doing if they are not doing already. That's a thing that can be done ahead of time, and it really brings a huge benefit when emergency happens. But there's kind of downside that not all threats and hazards can be preventable. So the things that we cannot prevent, sometimes we can mitigate. And it's really an effort to reduce loss of life, operations, property, and reduce that impact in general to the company, organization, municipality, government, country, or even continent, if you can reduce the effect of the emergency or damage. Simple things: notify early and kind of reduce the danger. So we saw a great example about the how much intelligence information was being shared before the war in Ukraine. So that already kind of prepared some of the processes and some of the actions to be taken if and when the incidents and the war started happening. And sharing the data is very important. If you can efficiently share data, you can mitigate most of the threats, most of the dangers, and most of the problems. And again, there are things that you cannot really prepare very efficiently, and you cannot mitigate. So that brings us to the next phase, the preparedness phase, and it's really kind of very agile thing. It's never ending. It's always happening, or should be always happening, because you need to plan for that. You need to train for that. You need to have the right tools in the right place at the right time. You need to evaluate your success, and if there is something lacking, you need to take corrective actions. Training plans and training the staff. Probably everybody from time to time has fake fire alarms, and that can be treated as an exercise or training, because we all kind of stand up and leave the office premises outside to the gathering point, and we train our kind of preparedness in case of real fire, but we treat it always as a real emergency. So we can definitely implement that in a bigger scale. What happens if we don't have electricity for 24 hours? Do our organization operations continue, or we need to find another solution? What do we do if we don't have internet? What if our critical infrastructure fails? What if the roads are damaged due to flood, hurricane, or other things? When you think about municipality or about the country as a whole, and definitely the whole organization must be involved in the preparedness. It cannot be only one or few emergency managers or resilience officers or cybersecurity officers taking care of the whole organization. Everybody must be involved and must take part in that preparedness initiatives. So when we prevented some things, we mitigated others. We had plans, and we did our homework. In some cases, we still get to the response phase. So probably you are aware that in the United States, there's a thing called hurricane season, and you can really prepare a lot, and you can mitigate most of the threats. You can build sandbags walls to protect the houses and critical infrastructure from flooding, but you cannot stop a hurricane. So in some cases, you need to respond, and you must take those actions and act to respond, to show support to the people, to reduce the emergency, and from pure chaos, make it a really kind of structured response that helps to save lives, reduce economic losses, and definitely reduce the suffering of communities and organizations. It's quite common to have a business continuity plan, and if we should be responding according to that business continuity plan. In this case, the staff, managers, stakeholders in general will have a plan and will have idea what to do and how to proceed and how to keep the organization operational. And if you have incident command system, if we are talking about municipality or about the country, that should be activated, as we saw during the COVID. The government of Lithuania initiated and activated the National Emergency Response Committee for COVID. Various laws, regulations were adapted to that day, to that situation, to make country more resilient to the challenges that came with the COVID. So it can involve everything from just leaving house leaving your office premises to conducting search operations, providing medical care, fighting fires, and really working as a community. And when we talk about response, very important part of that is cooperation and coordination with different organizations. Especially when we have bigger organizations, bigger companies that has multiple offices, and the communication is very important to have the same view, to have same information, to have same approach, and to act in a similar way all across the organization or even all across the country when we talk about emergency management at a bigger scale. And recovery consists of activities that continue beyond the emergency period. So if we restore our critical infrastructure, what was the impact? What do we need to do to kind of get back to our new normal or to the previous normal, if we can kind of get back to that? If we had a hurricane, how are we going to rebuild the communities? How are we going to bring back people to their homes? And there are very, very important things that we must do during the recovery phase, and that's improvements. So if you see that something is not working, you have to adapt. You have to change your behavior. You have to change the processes and maybe do things a little bit different. And when the incident or the emergency ends, after action reports or audits should be conducted so that we could improve, so we could understand what was done right, what was done wrong, what was done in time, what was too late, so that we could prepare our business continuity plan or emergency management plan for the next situation to be even better than it was before. And really working with all of 50 states in the United States, with federal agencies during the biggest events in the United States, like Super Bowl, presidential inaugurations, sporting events, concerts, we asked our partners what they learned from previous events and incidents. And most of them responded that they had a huge need to connect business continuity with emergency management. So that's even organizations working together with the non-government organizations, with public safety organizations, to have a single platform to ensure higher levels of collaboration, coordination, and communication all across those different disciplines that in some cases do not talk about, because business is about business, public safety is about public safety. It's not very common to kind of talk with firefighters or police officers, how do we manage one or another thing? But when the incident comes, when the emergency rises, all those partners need to work closely together to have a successful outcome. And when we talk about technologies to increase resilience, at the current time, we see that information, amount of information is just enormous. During the COVID, there was a lot of information. During the, kind of looking in Lithuanian examples, during the immigrant crisis from Belarus, there was a lot of information. At the current moment, there's just a flood of information, I would say. And it's sometimes very hard to distinguish between correct and fake information, what is operational information and what is important for you to know, and what is really not important thing that you can just skip. So if you have information and you have the right information at the right person or at the right decision maker, you can really make a huge impact. You can have decision making based on information. So it's not assumption based decision making, but it's based on data, based on information. And that really gives speed to the organization to be more resilient, faster, more agile. When we talk about emergencies, times in some cases is a very important factor to be successful and to get back to the new normal fast, instead of kind of having a huge periods of inactivity, not providing service to your customers or to your communities. Quality. If we have information, we can increase quality in our services. We can provide better services. We can provide more resilient services to our customers. Services efficiency is definitely based on information. How effectively can we serve our communities? Can we provide them efficient ways to consume that information or to get our services? And flexibility based on information. When we have good decision making, we have speed, our decisions are high quality, and our solutions are high quality. We have a wide range of information, and we can manipulate, use that information to our organization needs. We can become more flexible, offering different solutions and different approaches to being more resilient and to being more efficient. So I'll jump into the part about the software, and definitely some of the things were covered and will be covered today also. So when we talk about prevention and mitigation, that's really homework of organization. It has to be done, and I hope for you listening here, most of you or your organizations are already working on that or already have done that. So infrastructure is set up, data backup, recovery. We saw in Lithuania globally multiple incidents when data was lost, when infrastructure was hit, whether it's natural disaster like flooding, or it was man-made disaster with intent to destroy data. So it's not safe to have your client data under your table in a desktop computer. There are definitely way more resilient solutions to keep your customers safe, your customer data safe, and your organization safe as in general. The facilities, so physical facilities where you go to the office, those facilities can also be prepared and set up to be more resilient. We don't have hurricanes and floods in Lithuania, but access control, not to allow somebody else into your premises, prevention from fire, like fire detectors and other stuff. Very simple things that can prevent huge losses and threat to even people's life can be done ahead of time and must be done ahead of time. Software. I mentioned about this a little bit. So there are multiple software updates coming in probably every day, and organizations must really invest in that and keep their software kind of like impenetrable wall safe from the outside risks, especially with all the dangers that are lurking around at the current moment. Staff. So training staff is a very important part, and you can do a lot from the first aid training to emergency training to cybersecurity training to phishing training. All those things can be done like passively during the staff day or people's day at work with multiple available online training. And business continuity or emergency management plan, I think, is a necessity at the current moment for every organization. So what do you do if something happens? Who responds? What are the procedures? Who are going to notify who? And etc. A lot of things can be covered, can be trained, can be prepared ahead of time. And again, not all those threats that might come are preventable or possible to mitigate. So that kind of brings us to the next three things: preparedness, response, and recovery. Our organization is really kind of focusing on those three things and helping organizations, governments, and communities to work on that. We provide different modules with our VBOC platform. That's a worldwide used product to do business impact analysis, to manage resources and dependencies during the everyday operations and during the incidents or emergencies, conduct risk analysis. What are the threats? What are you ready for, and what are you not ready for yet? Manage vendors, suppliers, the kind of supply chain lines and other information. We do provide notification services to automatically send text messages, emails, voice calls, push notifications to applications, to alert staff, to notify staff, to get information from staff. Are they safe? Can they respond? Can we help you during those difficult times? And manage business contacts. How do we contact our partners? What do we do? How do we manage the events and incidents? So if you are a municipality or organization like public safety organization that you respond to the events, how do you manage those events during that time? How do you manage events? How do you get necessary additional staff if something is happening that should not be happening. Information about the team management, different information inputs and outputs, ability to manage your facilities, your locations with statuses, availabilities, and other information. File libraries to host your files, and customer complaints, if there are any, to talk about the processes. So we do offer a range of predefined modules for our clients, but also we build bespoke solutions to specific organizations according to their needs. And still, when we do implementations and when we talk about resilience, I'll use the same quote that was at the start of my presentation. So organization resilience is ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare, respond, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper. It sounds kind of easy, but there are some things that are not really easy to do. So people in the organization will not help if they are not aware of a plan. So there's really huge importance to have a business continuity plan and to share that plan with all the people in your organization, so that everybody would be on the same page and everybody would be a helper in case of emergency, not a problem, I would say. Time is very valuable, especially during the times of emergency. So everybody probably knows what happens when your critical infrastructure is inaccessible and your software or your solution cannot be delivered to your client, or clients cannot use your services. So if you need to kind of bring something back to operational state, there's really no time to read and understand the procedures. All those procedures should be ready ahead of time. Everybody who needs to know those procedures should be trained on that, and that's definitely better to have somewhere in the digital format with step-by-step instructions instead of just kind of huge printed hard paper copy. Manual tasks takes a lot of time, so we offer to automate most of those things. If you can think about the steps that you need to perform, why spend time on kind of clicking through the system if you can do single click and you can activate emergency management plan, you can send out the notifications, get responses, see the responses, who will be available when, do you have staff on site, do you have somebody who will be willing to come in after their work time, etc., etc. So automate everything what you can. And the emergency management plan, or in general, resilience, cannot be created or built during the emergency. That has to be done. That has to be created ahead of the emergency. So now is perfect time to think about that. And kind of a quote from Ukrainians that presented in the cybersecurity forum a month ago, probably. They said that we are lucky. We Lithuanians are lucky, and probably the whole Europe are lucky at the current moment, because Ukraine does not have time, and we have time to prepare for emergencies, from premise fire, office fire, to even big scale emergencies. So don't waste your time. Act now. Prepare a plan. Check your plan if you have one. Is it updated? Is it a really working plan? Train it. Because if you never train and never test your plan, that is very likely to fail. And we also saw multiple examples about that people were not aware, people were not trained, they did not know what to do. So we still have time. Time is perfect to train or test your plan. Thank you. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me via the contacts that you can see here, or just kind of shoot me a message via LinkedIn. I would be more than willing to talk about the emergency management, resilience, or solutions that we offer to our partners. If you have any questions, I don't know, Simonas, do we have a time for a question, or we should kind of leave those questions for later?
Thank you, Giedrius. So yeah, definitely we have a time for one question now. If anyone wants to reflect right now, I see Darius is asking out of curiosity. Please go ahead. You see the question.
Yeah. This is because I used our template that looked a little bit better, kind of dark theme instead of bright theme, and I forgot to remove the confidential kind of watermark or from the template. So that's on me.
Cool, thanks. And of course, Giedrius will stay with us for another hour, and you will be able to ask him some additional questions on the topics he just disclosed. Thank you, Giedrius, once again. And then we are moving to, if I may say so, keynote speaker. Carlos Sales is representing the new and fresh unicorn in the Baltics region. He comes from Nord Security, and Carlos, we are really very eager to hear more from your side.
Thank you for inviting us. And well, let's not lose any time. I'm going to start sharing my presentation. Just give me a second. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to give access because I didn't have Teams as Carolina.
Of course. Agne, most likely you will be also able to share the slides in case Carlos will have some issues.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I think I can right now.
Super.
Okay. So
that's a really fast learning curve, to adopt the new technologies.
So please let me know if you can see my presentation already.
It's good. Yeah, we see.
Presentation?
Might be presentation, might be your desktop. I don't know. Yeah, presentation right now. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So, well, yeah. Today I'm going to talk about cybersecurity challenges in a modern workplace. In this case, for example, we are going to touch a little bit also on what our colleagues were talking, Giedrius and Carolina, about risks, about how infrastructure is being targeted by different types of attacks, different attack vectors. But we are going to lower it a little bit to the workplace scenario, modern workplace scenarios, like the people that are going to be facing these challenges, the people that are going to be affronting these challenges, and so of course surpassing these challenges, and how can they do it? And for that, we are going to be looking at this agenda. First of all, we are going to look about what is like cybersecurity, how can we implement it, what it consists. Then we are going to go like how challenges in cybersecurity have been evolving, with also they are at the same time hand to hand with the cyberspace evolution. We're going to talk about how cyberspace starts evolving since ARPANET all the way to our present time. And then we are going to start talking about how remote workers started to be a norm rather than an exception, and how this new paradigm bring new problems actually on, but also help companies to grow and be more resilient and to expand even to other countries, to other regions, because now there's no need of having a physical office. You can just hire some remote workers from anywhere in the world, and you can have presence everywhere. Then we're going to talk about use cases in the modern world. For example, how can you implement these new methodologies like or frameworks like SASE or zero trust network authentications and so on in traditional network? How can you evolve your traditional network to more resilient and more easily adaptable infrastructures. And finally, we're going to talk about what's next. What can we do now to keep evolving, how not to be left behind, and how to be prepared for the new things that could come in the near future. So, well, let's do a little bit of a cybersecurity in a nutshell. We already had very good presentations before, but so let's have a little bit of a refresher here. So at least there should be at least 3 different pillars of cybersecurity. Then they could be expanded into more, but in this case, we have threat prevention, in which case, like, we need to have cybersecurity measures that prevent accesses and hacks in the first hand. For example, you could have a firewall and you can have antivirus, of course, and that's practically the minimum so far. But for example, if you have cybersecurity measures such as a firewall, but you don't have correct firewall rules, then it's like if you don't have some. Or for example, if you have an antivirus but you never update it, well, it's like if you didn't have one. Then we are going to talk also about physical security measures, because lately in this new global situations, the more the technology starts advancing, the more people start investing into new cybersecurity tools. But the more they invest in that, the less they take care of the physical access to the installations, for example. So it doesn't matter if you have the best tools in the world. If anyone can just come with a computer, just connect directly with the LAN cable into your server and download everything. So you also have to be dealing with that. And actually, most of the security certificates, cybersecurity certifications so far also cover this. And then also another way to prevent threats is to have an identity access management. So this is actually part of the zero trust network authentication in the sense that, for example, it doesn't matter if you already are, for example, on premises. You have to always think that the person that is trying to connect is an attacker, and you need to validate that they are who they are saying they are. So there are a lot of different ways of doing this. You can have a public-private certificate exchange. You can have, of course, the minimum, the base minimum is like user password protection and two-factor authentications and so on. And of course, in order to prevent a high-scale attack, cyber attack, you need to start thinking about network segmentation, which is something that in traditional servers didn't exist. This means that when you have a huge LAN or even a wide area network, you need to start segmenting your network into very small segments of this bigger network. For example, if you have a full infrastructure on premises, you have a server for your QA team, a server for your development team, server for your HR team, then me as a developer should not be able to access QA or HR. So in a case that my device gets compromised, they are only going to be able to access the small segment that I'm assigned to. And they are not going to be able to access, for example, HR, or they're not going to be able to access management and so on. And of course, the most basic one, always having patching and updates up to date, because most of the time there's like this attack that happened a few months ago, Log4j vulnerabilities. You need to be always going on. For example, it's a 0-day attack. Today there is no vulnerability. Tomorrow they find it and you are vulnerable. So you need to be always on the loop. Then, okay, sadly you got infiltrated by some malicious agent. Well, first of all, you need to know that you were infiltrated. So you need to have intrusion detection systems in place. And okay, you know now that there was someone inside. What did they do? Okay, you need to have the data integrity checks. For example, a very basic example, a university gets hacked, someone got into the database of the students, database system of the students, and changed some grades. Well, your data integrity checks should be able to know which record was changed, which was the last grade that it has, the new grade that it has now. So all your data is not corrupted by any changes, manual or massive changes into your infrastructure. And finally, intrusion detection system policies. So, for example, you can have a set type of setup on your infrastructure. Your sysadmin is going to connect every day at 9 a.m. to this specific server and do these specific tasks. They don't need to delete anything. So, for example, that's an example. If they delete something, then an alarm is set. Hey, why is this happening? So there could be a risk there, and then an alarm is sounding there. And finally, okay, something went wrong, something got in, and something was destroyed, something was altered. Well, we need to talk about threat mitigation. As Giedrus was talking about, we need to talk about what kind of backups we have, how can we restore everything that we already got destroyed, attacked, modified, and so on. And afterwards, we need to do a post-mortem of what happened so it never happens again, or at least make it harder for it to happen again. And then people will say, well, why should I do, why should I cover all of this? Well, because the cost of cybersecurity incidents are huge. So, for example, this is from 2019. This data is from 2019. So on the full year, it's $2.6 billion on remediation and mitigation cost on cybersecurity incidents all around. We are talking about data breaches where someone got into your infrastructure, got data from there and start selling it or exposing it. Ransomware, where people start getting into your infrastructure, start encrypting all your hard disk, and then, well, you didn't have access to it and you need to pay in Bitcoin for it to be out. Denial of service attacks, where if, for example, in a bank, if you have a denial of service attack, then you are, every single second that is happening, you are losing a lot of money because no one can get money in or out or invest or anything. And we are also talking about malware. Malware, not including ransomware, it's practically more destructive type of malware, something that someone will get into your infrastructure just to destroy whatever is there. They don't care about your data. They don't care about getting any money from it. They just want to disrupt your business. And this 2.6 billion in remediation, it's not taking into account PR cost, public relationships cost. For example, if you get hacked and data from your users get out, yeah, if you are an enterprise company, for example, you might be able to cover the costs of a big data breach, but it might be very hard to get back the trust of your users. So I think this is one of the biggest losses for any company that is related to a data breach, a ransomware, and so on. So, well, now we're going to talk about historical cyber security challenges, how cybersecurity challenges were evolving, and why we ended up in the situation that we are right now. Why there's so much ransomware, why there is so much data exploits in order to have some data breaches and steal information from us. So, for example, in 1969, it was the creation of the first, what they call internet works, or internet as we call it nowadays. So ARPANET and MILNET being the military side of the ARPANET. It was, the access was very limited. It was practically only to universities, military researchers, and they having actually been on record saying like, well, we knew that there are risks, but we were not thinking about like the explosive growth that what this was going to have. So, for example, because the access to it was very limited. So, for if I had a university, sure, I can access after asking. And there was encryption, yes, of course, but very low encryption, very rudimentary because CPUs were not that fast back then. Security was not a priority because, yeah, anyone couldn't just go there and have access to it. You need very specific hardware, very expensive hardware back in the day. So, yeah, they knew, but there were not a lot of malicious agents there. But then around the 82 and 89, the ISP starts coming. So there was a little bit of more internet proliferation. So a very rapid expansion of users from a few hundreds to 500,000 users. Now the risks that they were already there are exploitable. Now you could get something from there. But most of the types of malwares that there were more of jokes, more of pranks, more of researches. Like, for example, back then there was a worm called the animal worm. Practically what it does is that it would go and just copy itself with the word animal to any available space on a device. But this was not going to destroy any data that was there. It was just a prank. And for example, the Morris worm, that was just a research, what will happen if I create a software that will replicate itself through the network. And actually, that was one of the first internet outage because they didn't thought that it was going to get so out of hand. So after that, in the 90s, first commercial exchange and financial services started to appear with the approval of the different governing bodies around the world. So the internet maturity was very high. There's a lot of users now, around 77 million users. And now malware it was actually a business now because you can steal information, destroy infrastructure of your competitors and so on. So now that you can be able to steal information from credit cards, steal information from bank accounts, now it's when black hat hackers started to be more present there. And then around the 2000s, the internet was completely mainstream now. So there were almost 500 million users worldwide. And then black hackers again started to get into more kind of like mafias and groups that will start looking for ways of getting money out of it. So that brings us to cybersecurity today. So nowadays we have 1.17 billion active websites, and every day 250,000 new sites are created, and we have 5 billion active users, which most of them at least once or twice a year they go to online retail stores, like for example Amazon or eBay or Ali and so on, and this retail accounts for 3.5 trillion US dollars in revenue each year. And those are the good news, but what's on the backside of that? Well, that's almost 500,000 new malicious software is created each day, between remote access tools that are embedded into some type of software, the famous Trojans, some ransomware, some worms of any kind, and that leads us to almost 2,000 data breaches each year, and more than 300 million ransomware attacks. So again, as we were discussing before, a big company could be able to maybe pay the Bitcoin ransom for a ransomware attack. Maybe they could be able to have better type of backup systems where they have backups and then just rewrite whatever was encrypted by the ransomware. But small and medium business, a data breach or a ransomware attack could mean the end of the company. So it's very important that we have a huge understanding of what's going on here. So now we're going to talk about network evolution, how the networks started when the internet was starting to be a thing. So for example, here in a traditional network, small, medium to enterprise companies start integrating stuff like firewall, routers, a collection of them. And the thing here is that those type of devices, for example, in 1993, set a firewall and router for your local network that will be able to access the internet will set you back like 50,000 euros of today's money. So it's a big investment that a lot of people, okay, they needed to do it because they needed to be online to keep growing as companies. But after that, they stopped evolving on that because it was so huge of an investment that they don't want to do it again. So they start getting back into the new technologies, and therefore they were also more prone to attacks from those sites. So for example, one of the main characteristics of this type of traditional networks is that most of the time they only have one single entry detection point, which brings the challenge of a single point of failure. If your firewall, if your router goes bad, it crashes or something, your full company, it's offline. It's not going to be working on the internet anymore. It was a simple design. It was easy to administrate, but the fact that everything is in a single LAN and everything is interconnected mean that, for example, if one PC, if one device, it's compromised, then the whole network will be compromised. So in this case, if the firewall was compromised and some extra rules were added there, your whole network was exposed to attackers. And if you didn't have any type of like a safeguard, some intrusion detection system or so on, then you will probably not even know that there was someone listening to your data packets going back and forth. And that's a very high risk. Now, this is what I would like to call a traditional network 2.0. In this case, for example, bigger companies started to try to interconnect their local networks, but there was not an easy way of doing it. So what they were doing back in the day was creating dedicated lines. This means that they will go to the ISPs and hire a specific internet line that will only connect their two premises. Then, yeah, sure, you have like a wide area network, a one physical one. But the thing about this is that, again, if one of the firewalls was compromised, then both LANs were compromised. The whole wide area network was compromised. And this also, it's not very easily scalable because if you want to add another office, you need to add another dedicated line, you need to add another firewall, a router, and so on. So huge investment, added complexity to routing and management, and not easily scalable. Then, okay, well, let's not involve ISPs here. Let's not get a dedicated line. So what started going on in the early 2000s was VPN servers, local VPN servers. So for example, you will connect from a local office through the internet into your office where you have the VPN server, and this will reroute your connection through this VPN server into any, for example, Google, YouTube, or another office that you would like to connect to. This most of the time is what's going on with the exchange of keys. So it was fairly secure, but again, if someone were to get into your VPN server, everything was exposed again. So yes, pros and cons, and also it's not very easily scalable. If you want to scale this, you either have to scale horizontally, getting more VPN servers, and but then again, you need to add another type of different infrastructure there to balance the load there, or you need to expand vertically, getting a bigger and better VPN server, and so on, so on. So it added a lot of cost to maintain these VPN servers, and you need specific, very specialized people to be managing this. So now we are going to talk about modern networks. In this case, for example, the location of the people that is going to connect into your network is completely agnostic. They could be work at your office, they could be working from home, they could be working from abroad. Doesn't matter, it's completely transparent because they could be connecting through fully managed VPN solution or connectivity solution. For example, in this case, we are having here NordLayer with private gateways in the middle. That way you can connect to your local network in the HQ, remote offices, even your cloud infrastructure could be integrated into this without the need of getting new hardware to managing your own set of rules on your server sites and so on. So but then again, one of the main challenges of this, having this as good as it sounds, as good as this looks, migration from older architectures could be not very convenient for some people. But this is not because it's not good, it's because the lack of understanding can lead to mistrust. They want to see the server, they want to be able to see what kind of servers they have, what kind of infrastructure they want to manage it. So these are outdated practices, and at the end of the day, this could lead to have just a local network just distributed. So not the ideal situation in this case. So now we're going to be a little bit of seeing a little bit of risk evolutions. We already talked about the infrastructure. Now, how can that infrastructure be affected? So as we were discussing before, in the 60s, 70s, the first viruses appeared as jokes, researches, or lack of insight, lack of hindsight, like maybe I should do this, and then oops, no, I broke the internet. And that was actually something real back then. In the 80s, well, they start doing intentionally destructive malware. And actually the first epidemics of computer viruses arises back then with the Da Vinci virus, the Jerusalem virus, and then in the 90s, beginnings of 2000, also the I Love You worm was a very bad situation back then, and the Blaster worm and so on. So now we go back to the 2000 and 2010. Social engineering started being a thing because people realized that it was easier to get access to networks via people and not via technology, because technology is easy to harden, but people is not if they don't have the correct training. And back in the day, there was a huge lack of cybersecurity culture. That, of course, in 2010, 2020, it's getting better, but we have to be always aware that no one is exempt. We need to be always prepared for everything. And of course, in 2020, botnets start being proliferating, DDoS with these botnets. Ransomware are very prevalent, and we see a huge shift from destructive malware to spyware and data retrieval. And we can talk about very notable hacks that happen. So we can know that, for example, if these huge companies, these huge institutions are not are vulnerable, well, also probably most companies are. So, for example, in 1997, Department of the Air Force, an Air Force base was hacked by a Danish hacker. He was a teenager. He was just looking around, see what he could do, and he managed to get access. Luckily, he was just curious and nothing bad happened out of there. But if there was a malicious agent there, then things could have get worse. In 2007, there was a widespread denial of service attack in the Estonian cyberspace. ISPs were dealing with a lot of traffic to the, for example, some Estonian government and institutions web pages, and it was quite widespread. And I mean, a whole country was attacked by a botnet. So yeah, if they can, then probably small and medium business can too. And for example, MTGOX, which was an exchange page in 2014, was hacked so badly that $460 million between Bitcoin wallets and bank accounts was stolen, and it hasn't been recovered to this day. Even Disney was hacked by their WannaCry ransomware, which is one of the most famous ransomware software that is going on even to this day. An unreleased movie was affected by it, was encrypted, and they had to pay in Bitcoin for this ransom to be able to retrieve that movie. And actually last year, more than 500 million people information was stolen from Facebook. So this information, it can be used for some other type of attacks. They could be used for credential surfing. They could be used for a lot of things, and this is very, very dangerous. So now we're going to talk about how this new consideration has to be taken on modern workspaces. And one of the main things that has been happening in the past few years is the rise of the remote work. But I mean, on one side, it's good for companies to have more options, to have workers from all around the world, to be able not to have them at the offices. But at the same time, there's a lot of risks related to it if not done properly. And the COVID pandemic forced organizations to work from home from one day to the other, and even if they were not prepared to. So for example, there was a lot of organizations that they didn't have the infrastructure flexibility to enable this, and they didn't have secure ways of communicating, even if they were be able to give access to this remote workforce. And there were minimum to none policies to working remotely because no one was thinking that it was going to happen. And local networks were not hardened enough to receive remote connections, as we were discussing before. If they were not segmented, then yeah, connecting directly from outside could be a very big security risk. But in this case, as we can see in this graphic, it's going to be here to stay. A lot of people don't want to go back to the office, and this is, I will say, the new reality that we as companies, we need to deal with. So in this case, we end up with this type of architecture, a hybrid architecture, where you have outside users, you have on-premise users, and you have users working directly into cloud infrastructure. Of course, you can't have your cloud infrastructure completely open, so you need to make sure that only certain specific people is able to connect, and from certain specific places. So in this case, using a private gateway, a private server, you are able to connect from anywhere to any of your infrastructure. Of course, using zero trust network authentication, following the best, at least the core SASE framework rule sets, and so on. So now we're going to talk about modern workplace use cases. This is one of the most prevalent, at least, let's say, on this scenario that we are living. There are a lot of controlled cyberspaces. We have Russia, we have Belarus, China. This is probably the main three ones that are actually controlling directly the traffic that is going in and out of the country. But there are also some controlled cyberspaces that are not directly controlled by the government. For example, there are countries where journalists are tracked and even killed if they are found. So they really need a way to communicate from wherever they are into a remote secure office. So in this case, a secure tunnel will be the best and the ideal way of connecting from one to the other. And another use case is wherever you are, you're connected to a public network. You can be connected from, I don't know, coffee shop, you can be connected from your home, you can be connected from hospital, hotels, and so on. You need to be able to keep working, to keep being productive, but without leaving security aside. So again, of course, you are going to go through the internet, but at the end of the day, you are going to end up into your local network. But to that, you need a secure tunnel. So, okay, you need to be connecting there. But for example, what will happen if you have a secure tunnel, you have a VPN, and someone steals your device? Well, you have other type of security solutions, for example, multi-factor authentications, biometrics, third-party authentications, and so on, that will ensure that this is not going to happen. And finally, here we can see an example of network segmentation that is done directly into a private cloud, NordLayer private cloud in this case. So going through a private gateway that is only specialized for development team is going to be able to access the development servers, and that's it. Same with administration team, same with design team. And finally, as we were discussing before, a hybrid workplace where you either are in a public network or on your local infrastructure, or working directly into the cloud, your cloud infrastructure, any type of cloud infrastructure that supports allow listing or network access control list is able to connect through this type of connections, because connections work on a low level in which the only thing that you need is your IP, which is a private IP that is included in a dedicated server and a dedicated gateway. So that will be it for me. But before finishing, I would like to end up my speech with what could happen next. We will never know what will happen next because we are not psychics. We don't have a crystal ball to know what's going on. But looking at the present climate, we can make sure that whatever happens, we are prepared for it. I mean, if there's an escalation of the ongoing wars that are around us, we are prepared for it by having better risk management, having better infrastructure resilience, be prepared to work from remote locations. We can be prepared to work from home. Again, if, for example, another pandemic comes over, I mean, crossing my fingers that nothing happened, but in the case that it happens, luckily for most companies, this shock that happened 2 years ago helped them to be more resilient on that side. So at least we need to be prepared for the worst, and as Giedre said, hoping for the best. So that's all from my side. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for a really comprehensive view on challenges on the current modern environment. And actually, basically, you responded to my question I had for you regarding, you shared the history, what's next. So basically, you already did that. Then let's move to the last presenter of today, Dr. Ąžuolas Čekanavičius, who is also the member of AmCham Digital Committee, and he will speak a bit more on some legal aspects of this topic. Ąžuolas, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simonas. I will try to share my slides. Trying to upload it to the cloud right now because this is a cloud solution we're using. So as I see, we are a little bit behind the schedule, but this is what is happening all the time. So not a big problem here. Can you see my title slide?
Yes, it's visible.
Perfect. So without any further ado, I will start my presentation and I will try to deal with the main legal aspects of cloud services. Because the previous speakers had made an outstanding performance about what we can do to be more cyber secure, to ensure business continuity, to be cyber resilient and stuff like that. And as we heard from the presentations, it seems that the modern cybersecurity system and architecture will always need the assistance from the cloud services and cloud computing solutions. And for me as a lawyer, it's always, the main aspect is what is all about from the legal perspective. What are the key things which has to be discussed while providing, while acquiring, while using cloud services, while negotiating IT cloud contracts, and of course, what things should be taken into consideration, legal aspects, of course, before starting the use of cloud services, procuring them, and of course, then within the entire course of provision of those services. So first of all, the definition of cloud services, at least in Lithuania, it is provided in our national law on cybersecurity, and it gives a very general definitions, saying that, as you see, services whose recipient remotely access a communications and information system infrastructure managed by these service providers. So behind this general definition, we see from the practical perspective that we have three traditional service models in practice: software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Of course, this is the definition which comes from the practice, from the practical aspects, from the methods, how those services are provided by the service providers. And of course, those definitions, at least from this perspective, depends on how much is it left on a certain institution's own premises and what is given, to the cloud services. But other than that, we have another very important classification. It's public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud. And this classification comes from the method how cloud services are provided. And public cloud, we say, is a cloud computing that's delivered via the internet and shared across organizations. And private cloud, of course, is a cloud computing that is dedicated solely to your organization. Of course, once we talk about cybersecurity and cybersecurity solutions, so many of them, I'm not an expert here, I'm just a legal advisor, but nevertheless, you would probably say, yeah, of course, private cloud is much more secure. But of course, it's much more expensive. And as it was very well pointed out by the previous speakers, that cybersecurity is not the sphere where a lot of businesses would like to invest a lot of money, and that chief information or chief security officers within the companies has to struggle a lot to convince the board, the management, to invest a lot into cybersecurity. So that's why, obviously, the best solution usually in practice, which is chosen by the businesses, and also as for the public sector, could be advised as a hybrid cloud, which is an environment which uses both the most sensitive information, which is very confidential, or which deals with a very sensitive, for example, personal data and stuff like that, could be used only with the help of private cloud services. And of course, probably there is some amount of information which is categorized as not that confidential to say it can be used by the public cloud solutions. But other than definitions, of course, we have legal regulations of those cloud services in place. And well, the first thing we have to take into consideration when we talk about the public sector, of course, and the public institutions, their controlled enterprises, which under our laws are the users of the secure network system, and there is a huge list of such organizations. So now, according to current legal regulation, they couldn't use the services of the private cloud service providers, and that public data they actually possess should be stored only in public data centers. But during the Ukraine crisis, our government understood, and after a lots of presentations being given from the Ukrainian side on their experience. We have seen and realized, at least our public sector did, that the cloud services are of an extreme importance in case we want to ensure business continuity, let's say, in a wider sense, to ensure the public services continuity, to ensure the continuity of the existence of state and fulfilling its functions, even some disaster happened in a particular territory, like war broke. And at least now, all the legislative procedures are not finished yet, but we really hope, because there are just some formalities left, that a new law will be enacted, which will say that, first of all, there will be, at least now, in the current version, there are 2 dates. The first is just very fast, 1st of June 2000. I'm sorry, it's July 1st, 2022. There is a sort of mistake. But there is an amendment which will come into force saying that not only that the state and its institutions may use the cloud services, but some very sensitive information has to be, its copies has to be stored on a cloud. And it is not said just, on the government-owned cloud. No, it should be stored in a cloud server using the cloud services and in the cloud of the providers, which are actually established in the Republic of Lithuania and other member states of the European Union, in the United States, or the member states of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. No? And of course, we are thinking of the United States in this respect, first of all. And later on, in the year 2024, the legislation will say that all the information will be divided into some categories. And in terms of critical and important state information, it should be stored in public data centers, with the exception that by government decision, some information copies might be stored in the private cloud. And of course, medium and low priority state information and resources might be also, without any separate governmental decision, be stored on a private cloud. But when we come to peculiarities, because we see there will become even more and more important, as the public sector will also be allowed to use cloud services, being it private. The type of contract and agreement we conclude here. Because first of all, the major mistake which is done and as understood by a lot of market participants is that somehow, since historical perspective, such agreements are being qualified as a license agreement. And we should know that service provider does not provide any IP license. And the client, in terms of IP law, does not use software or other objects of IP as in the meaning of the intellectual property law. And this is a general rule, which is actually now well established in the IT law worldwide. And if some client will try to force the service provider, it will struggle that the service provider would agree to give any IP-related indemnities. And there are a lot of practical reasons for that. I will just because of lack of time, I will just name one of them. Some cloud solutions are based, for example, on open source software. And some copyleft licenses, they restrict the use of that software in different kind of methods and way. But the cloud services are being allowed under those copyleft licenses. So to be precise, some of the cloud service providers, they simply will not be able to agree with their clients that they will provide some IP licenses while providing the cloud services. So the general rule is that the cloud services and the agreement of cloud services is not a license agreement in terms of intellectual property law. So what rights are granted? Usually what the clients ask us is the rights to access and use services under certain conditions. And those can be, for example, for business purposes only, right? Defining the business sector, the territory, users' relations to certain company, whether only the employees should be allowed to access the service, or there should be subcontractors, etc., etc. Of course, there might be some prohibitions to resell and use just for your own purposes. Of course, there would definitely be some acceptable use policies, how the cloud services should be used, what the activities are allowed, what's prohibited, and etc. But in general, usually the access rights to the services are granted, not the IP rights. Then when talking about type of agreement, what is important? This is a service agreement. There is a reason behind that the services are called software as a service, infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, because the service providers want them to work as a service. It's not a lease. Even sometimes we will say, you know, in our common language, or even if we write in a contract, if we write, for example, the lease of the virtual server, from the legal standing, from the legal point of view, it will be qualified as a service contract, because the very idea behind the contract and the very idea of contract that we do care about the service result, whether we can use it or not, but not focus on the idea what kind of exact physical service are being transferred at our disposal, what kind of particular software will be transferred somehow to us. No, there is nothing about that. There is just a service and results of the service we want to use, for example, to be able to store data on some called virtual service, to have access to it. But that's it. We don't know what's happening on the cloud, and the service provider, as long as it provides us a service as agreed in the contract, it's okay for us. It can choose any technical means to achieve that. It can even change the hardware. We don't know until the services are provided under the agreement. So the most important, of course, then comes the description of the service or functionalities. There might be a practice that the service provider will say that, you know, I am providing the services as is. Check our system, check our website, please do go check our documentation, you will see how it works. But as a cloud services user, usually is very universal and provided as such for many users, for many clients. So this might be the case. Of course, there might be there might be functional descriptions, specifications, online documentation, user manuals, and a lot of other stuff. But especially once now the public sector, we believe, will migrate to the cloud very fast and very often when it comes to public procurement and its procedures. So of course, the recommendation for the public sector would be, if there are any representatives from there, well, to keep that into mind, that usually the cloud services as is, and probably some representatives from the market, we have from IBM, Microsoft, and some other companies here, they will say, you know, that Microsoft Azure, for example, it is created as a service, not taken into consideration, you know, the exact interests of Lithuanian entities. No, it is created as a universal product for everybody. So they will not be able to adapt it according to the certain rules of the certain public procurement. So therefore, this should be taken into consideration. Of course, we see in practice some adaptations, some fitting to some specific requirements, it's possible. But as a rule, it's not that easy, you know, as in a custom services provision. The second thing, which is very important for us, and as we hear, is cybersecurity. Because we will store, at least what we will do, we will give our data to the cloud. So we want that cloud to be cyber secure. And the first thing I would like to emphasize here, that laws are not enough. Because if we take a legal regulation, at least nowadays, it can be even not applicable for the particular cloud service provider. For example, due to the exception that cybersecurity requirements established in our national law on cybersecurity are not applicable for small and very small enterprises. And taking into consideration the Lithuanian market and how big it is, and taking into consideration the amount of cloud service providers, which are usually providing different type of cloud services, so the threshold might be pretty high here, because the small enterprise is the one which has less than 50 employees and which actually meets at least one of the following criteria. Either the company annual revenue does not exceed 10 million euros, or the value of the assets in the undertaking balance does not exceed euro 10 million. So basically at this point, all of us, we should take into consideration that laws are not enough just to say, you know, they're probably cyber secure because the law says so, because the law might not be even applicable. But of course, if you deal with the big companies, which exceeds those limits, definitely the law will be applicable. Nevertheless, when we talk about cybersecurity and we say that law is not enough, we shall do some small due diligence here. So we have to keep in mind that either, as for the practical perspective, as the cloud service providers, they usually provide probably typical or the same service for everybody. So either they will be very cyber secure or they will be not cyber secure at all. So basically, we have to assess how cyber secure the certain service provider is, taking a lot of factors into consideration. Because I want to emphasize once again, if the chief security officer cannot convince his board to invest a lot into cybersecurity, and that cloud service provider will be the one who will not take care a lot about cybersecurity, so all of its clients will be in trouble. And if one of the clients comes and says, oh, look, we need you to invest more into cybersecurity, so probably this will not be the case here. So that's why the entire service provider should be evaluated on the terms whether it's cyber secure or not. So as I mentioned, the first thing the business can do, the potential client can do, of course, to do the little due diligence in advance, what the service provider is all about and how cyber secure it is. Of course, we usually see in practice that there are specific requirements for cybersecurity being included into the contracts. And they usually are related to some international standards that, for example, ISO 27001, ISO 27017, or there are many others which can be included into the cloud services agreement that, you know, you have to be compliant with some particular standards. Cybersecurity insurance might be also the condition for the provision of cloud services. When I'm talking about the due diligence, so of course, the client might check in advance and access the documentation if it's publicly available, information security policy, disaster recovery plan, business continuity plan, etc. But what's on paper, not necessarily in practice. So if you want or have a possibility to dig deeper, of course, some potential clients can assess practical processes, whether they are in place, or ask simply questions the service providers. I mean, how often do you do backups? Where do you do then encryptions? What's about data encryption in terms of rest data and in transit? What's the management of access rights all about? As the professional colleagues of mine has pointed out, a lot of critical areas which should be taken into consideration while assessing the cybersecurity of the certain service provider. But nevertheless, from a practical perspective, there is not an often case that all documentation will be available or cloud service provider will provide many answers to a lot of questions you will raise. So as I was in a last practical training in London, and there was one famous lawyer, the cybersecurity lawyer, giving a lecture. So at least his position was that, you know, usually the least you can do is just to check the client's feedbacks, recommendations, and comments about a certain cloud service provider. And basically, even from the public information, you might see whether they had some big incidents in the past, whether their clients are raising issues somewhere in the public chats or public comments. Now, as a cloud services are services, how do we ensure the quality of services and how do we measure them? So, as we all probably know, those are service level agreements, and usually the model of 3 R's is established there: is response, repair, and remedy. As one of the quality criterions of the cloud service is usually the uptime. Sometimes there is a service speed. Sometimes there are even clients' feedback results. But the question which has to be answered also here, like who monitors and calculates all those quality criterions? And in case of disputes, whom the parties will rely as an evidence? Because of course, we have some practical situations when there are disputes regarding the quality of cloud services, the availability, the percentages, or others. And the users, the clients say, hey, I don't trust that monitoring system because it's mainly operated by the service providers. So this is the question to be answered. Of course, sometimes we see the clauses requiring the user to provide the newest service version, the prohibition of discrimination, that somebody who pays less gets the older access, has an older access to an older service version. But this is not typical when it comes to the worldwide cloud services, which usually are of the same level, or at least of the same version for all of their clients. Definitely, there is no 100% uptime or free guarantee. So in case of error, we have some tables and some, depending on error level, reaction times and even remedy times being offered by the cloud service providers. Of course, this is just an example how it might look like, but in any event, this is very important to see whether it's satisfactory for the service user or not. Finally, one very interesting thing to take into consideration that the cloud services are universal. It might be provided from any country of the world. So please know that time zones are different. And of course, jurisdictional differences are important. So we had some disputes in our practice, funny ones, but of course, once you work in totally different time zone than the service provider, and we say that, for example, there is one service level within the business hours and the other service level after the business hours. But of course, the business hours in the United States of America are totally different from the ones we have in Lithuania. Or the holidays, or the public holidays days, for example, in which in a cloud services agreement, it is written that the price will be doubled for any technical assistance during the public holidays, but they are different and depending on from country to country. Finally, we'll have to deal with the situation, and what if the service level agreement, no matter how great it is, will be breached? And when it is, what happens then? The usual practice is that the service providers, they want to offer the service credits. They say, yes, if we breach the SLA, we will provide you some service credits, which means a discount or a possibility to buy additional services for them. Of course, we can talk about contractual penalties. And finally, liquidated damages, but this is important for Lithuania because Lithuanian law does not accept liquidated damages. It's just the Anglo-Saxon Institute of Law, which is very popular in cloud services agreement. So yet again, the applicable law is very important for Lithuanian clients. If it's Lithuanian law, then liquidated damages probably will be qualified by the court as simply a contractual penalty. Finally, the level of tolerance and definition of material breach. What breaches shall be done? How many times SLA shall be breached? In what manner? Or what is uptime will be already treated as a material breach? Because it depends whenever the client can quit or unilaterally terminate the cloud services agreement for convenience, not for convenience, but for a reason, for a material breach. Limitation of liability. This is very important question for all of us. This is the typical cloud services agreement clause. But some businesses who has no big or long-lasting experience of the use of cloud services, they're usually shocked with those limitations on liability. Because you will obviously have a dollar cap. This is the maximum amount of damages the cloud service provider would like to pay you, compensate in case the business suffers that. Of course, there will be typical exclusion on some types of damages. Typically, the cloud services providers will say, no, we will not in a way be responsible for indirect, consequential, special, or reputational damages. And of course, there might be some limitations on types of fault, whether the harm was done by the faulty actions or whether by negligence. But nevertheless, those are typical conditions. And I would like to say that although no matter how scary it will look like for the business, but nevertheless, the price of the cloud services is actually set, taking into consideration those limitations of liabilities. And some cloud service providers will never go for a maximal or unlimited liability. And this is very much important usually for public procurements, because what I've seen from the practice, when the cloud services are bought during the public procurement procedure, this is a big shock for the organizations who want to buy cloud services. And very few problematic areas for the end. So first of all is data migration. So please keep into consideration that before or after the expiration of the service agreement, migration of data will be very important. So it is important what is needed from the cloud services provider, what assistance is needed, in what way, in what formats. And of course, what is the price for all of those services for assisting the client to migrate all the data back to the client or to the other service provider identified by the client. And definitely all this stuff related to personal data. Is there certain duties of service provider related to GDPR, audits, whether the audits are done when, whether the client itself wants to audit the service provider. This is not typical. Usually the service provider says, okay, I will audit myself once per year, for example, and I will give you access to the audit reports. Sub-processes. And geography, of course, which is very much important at the end of the day, because as we all know, under the GDPR, we have restrictions where we can store our personal data or our client's personal data or anybody's personal data, and what formalities are necessary to transfer the data outside the European Union or European Economic Area. So that's about it. I have tried to be as brief as possible. So in case of any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
Good. Thank you very much, Ąžuolas. And yeah, these are really very important your insights and the comments, as you know, technology right now goes very closely with those legal policy things. So as we are out of time, so my advice would be to do the following. To respect, the audience, I will not provide my own questions, but basically we will concentrate on the questions from the audience. And I see already one in the chat window. All others who has any, reflections, comments, questions, more than welcome to share in the chat, or simply, open the camera, raise the hand and say. So the question in the chat is, could it be proper to ask suppliers to disclose known vulnerabilities in the products or infrastructure being supplied in a contract or as a part of the supplier due diligence? And in what way can such be achieved? So any of the speakers, more than welcome to simply answer.
Well,
yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, sure.
I can answer just from my legal perspective, as those relations are of pure contractual nature. So of course you can always ask a service provider to say, I'm very curious about how cybersecure you are. Please provide me with such an information and I will make my decision whether to conclude a cloud services agreement or not. As well as it is quite, possible from the legal point of view to say that I would like to amend your terms of service and will say, that you shall make a warranty that you are not aware of any cyber incidents in the past, that you have never severed them and that like that. From the private law perspective, I see no problem here. But of course, my colleagues will add something on if I will write such a letter to, for example, G Cloud, right, or to Microsoft Azure, probably their company policy will not be to amend their terms of service, you know, for each of the client in the first place. And secondly, of course, if they will start providing the answers to every potential client, I'm not sure how many resources they would have to put there. So from the legal point of view, there's no problem, and there can be many technical solutions to achieve that. But from the business perspective, from the cloud services provider point of view, so I will leave the others to answer the question, like how much they go into discussions with each client and how much they're willing to change their terms of service according to the requests of any client.
Yeah, I could elaborate a little bit on the IT side of things, engineering side of things. There has been precedents of this happening. In the past, for example, Oracle has been doing these kind of things like, hey, you know what, we found this or that on this specific product. And even if it's on contract, they have, yes, mentioned due diligence. They need to provide for our explanation, at least a very basic explanation, and a fix for that, and the possible risks that could be related to this. Some other companies back in the day also, for example, Sun Microsystems were also doing that. And yeah, I mean, there are precedent that companies do this, and they most of the time they try to fix it via patching, via updates, and just by notifying the user that, hey, we found this vulnerability, this will fix it. You could have this or that issue, check on this, and that's it. Like, follow these steps to ensure that you were not affected, or if you were affected, you should be able to fix it this way.
Good, thank you. I see one question for myself asking ransomware. Can OneDrive be used for storing end users' files as a mitigation to ransomware threat in case user device gets encrypted? So basically the answer is yes. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business Protection have built-in features that help protect against ransomware attacks. Any other questions or comments? And if not, so maybe just one question from my end for the panelists. And well, Giedrius mentioned, and of course our colleagues as well, some examples or references with, let's say, other countries or markets. So how do you look, and it's not a question only for Giedrius, it's also for you, Carlos, for Carolina and others. How do you compare, if of course we can compare Lithuania with US or you know, other key countries in terms of this resilience, cybersecurity? So Giedrius, Carlos, Carolina, more than welcome to chip in.
So I can start. I'll see that when we talk about bigger picture, I'll not kind of dive deep into the cybersecurity. That's not my strong side, and we have definitely experts on our panel here. But when we look in the business continuity or emergency management, so definitely there are differences. We live kind of quite in a calm country. We meet those challenges, but at the same time, quite easily we go through those challenges without kind of investing too much. And maybe that made us a little bit kind of sleepy and lacking the preparedness side and investing less into preparing for those threats. And we definitely can look into the Western European countries who do invest a lot in public safety, emergency preparedness, cybersecurity, in company scales and kind of countrywide. I'm very kind of happy about the Lithuanian military cybersecurity and defense center. I can't remember the exact name, but they're doing a great job, and they're also an example for other countries. So I think we are lacking in some areas, but definitely kind of leading some initiatives in others. And it's just kind of the new normal that we are trying to understand what is that and how do we meet that, and how do we kind of manage those challenges that are coming against us almost every year now for 3 years already.
Thank you, Giedrius. Others?
If I may add something, my observation is that in US and especially in Asia last year, it was a lot of large breaches, and they were very costly for the companies. I guess in our region, like Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, we don't have such significant breaches yet. So the companies are little, maybe they don't realize how big the threat is yet, and are a little slower maybe and less mature. But of course, I think it's changing, especially with the latest war in Ukraine. Our country started to really realize how big the threat is. So I think this is also like little differences between us and the, I don't want to say Western world, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. Good. Carlos, something from your end?
Yes, I will, for example, use my home country. I'm original from Mexico. Well, Mexico and Latin America are very far behind in terms of cybersecurity. And compared, for example, to Lithuania, Lithuania has a very advanced system, for example, military cybersecurity. And after some like kind of big breaches, for example, the CTB that happened a couple of years ago, yeah, a lot of companies start realizing that they can't just go around without cybersecurity, without securing what they have there. So yeah, in terms of they're comparing to, for example, Latin America, comparing to some other countries that are not on the doorsteps of yeah, war and stuff like that, war situations, it's very well prepared as far as I have seen.
Thank you, Carlos. Ąžuolas, any comments from your end?
Well, from my point of view, there will be the only comment that usually, you know, as a lawyer, I can say that a lot of companies still do have a good cybersecurity on the paper, but when it comes to practice, to actually to follow those rules, which are in whatever in use access policies or password management policies or information security policies, so some Lithuanian companies simply forget that. So yeah, I'm really happy to hear that a lot of them not only have information security documentation in place, but actually run penetration testing or actually follow those rules very strictly, actually educate their workers. And of course, I hope that they invest huge amounts into cybersecurity and the management of the companies, right? Really understand how cybersecurity is important. So just a small note that we still have some clients who come and say, and even big companies, they say, hey, we need a documentation in place because we will start providing one service or another, and whatever the controlling authority is asking us to show, and we don't have any. So we say we always like feel the moral obligation to say them that, well, no, we cannot just give you, you know, drafts of the document. You have to be really cyber secure. And that is also very, very important, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Ernest. And colleagues, as we are really out of time and need to be mindful of your time, so I want to thank a lot AmCham Lithuania for bringing us together on this really important and hot topic. Like our speakers already said that let's not waste the time, don't wait, let's test, train, prepare. And yes, of course, security and resilience costs, but you know, some, let's say, investments definitely will help you to prepare for, you know, some really serious scenarios. And you know, better. Sometimes we're saying like better to be safe than sorry. And well, you are welcome to approach AmCham Lithuania or any of their speakers to get more info, to, you know, to go into more in-depth discussions on specific matters which you are most interested. And well, stay safe and secure, and we'll see you in the upcoming AmCham Lithuania events. Have a great day.